welcome to the Biddeford Parsonage Museum, historical residence of Lucy Maud Montgomery during 1894-95. Come in, relax, and join us for Storytime with LM Montgomery.
Good afternoon, I'm Kit Loschiuk from the Biddeford Parsonage Museum, and this is a story of a baking of Gingersnaps, which was the first published short story that LM Montgomery was able to publish. It's the baking of Gingersnaps. I believe this plum cake must be done. There's nothing comes off on a straw anyhow. Bessie, come and see what you think. The speaker held the oven door partly open, and a warm, plummy odor steamed out and filled the kitchen. The girl who was sitting on the edge of the table, filling a plate of thin, fluted tart shells with spoonfuls of a trembling red jelly, slipped down, coming over, peering in with a pretty expression of perplexity on her face. Well, I should say it was, Alma. You'd better take it out and then come and help me fill these tarts. That's all we have to cook, isn't it? The kitchen, though small, was immaculately clean. The floor was spotless, the stove shining, and the dishes in the small open cupboard were neatly arranged in polished rows. A long banner of sunshine fell in through the doorway and on the doorstep itself. Shaded by a wide-browed maple, sat a grave white cat. The open window was screened on the outside by hop vines, whose encroaching green tendrils crept almost to the sill. The cool shadows of their leaves danced over the table and the plates of tarts. A half-open pantry door revealed shelves supporting a goodly array of iced cakes and pies, crisp cookies, jelly rolls, tarts, and patty pans, cooling in front of two little square windows. Bessie filled her shelves with a dainty appreciation of her work. She was a very pretty girl, slender and rather saucy-looking, with a straight feminine nose and long-lashed round eyes. Her fair bangs, being out of a curl in the hot kitchen, were pinned back from her blue-veined brow, and her pink and white skin was rather flushed with heat. Alma was the taller of the two, and some thought her prettier, though Bessie was Aunt Clem's favorite. Her hair was darker, and being naturally curly, her bangs gave her no trouble, but always crept caressingly around her smooth white forehead. Her eyes were dark gray, with a certain undercurrent of roguishness in their depths, and when she smiled, the most delicious dimples started into unsuspecting being in her round cheeks and the corners of her mouth. Both girls were enshrouded in voluminous kitchen aprons of dark blue print, rather becoming and dainty in their wide frills, a waste of material which Aunt Clem's considered nothing short of extravagance. Alma had gone into the pantry with her plum cake when Aunt Clem entered the kitchen. She was a handsome, dignified old lady with an old-fashioned snowy curls and keen, dark eyes behind her gold-rimmed glasses. Both of her nieces stood considerably in awe of their imperious aunt. Her undeniable kindness was mingled with a great deal of scrutinizing and, as it seemed to them, unjust severity. Bessie slipped off the table, hoping her aunt had not seen her in such an undignified position, and wondering uneasily what could be keeping Alma so long in the pantry. What if she were up to anything that Aunt Clem would disapprove of? "Well, Bessie," said her aunt in a kindly voice, "how are you girls getting on? I hope everything will be as nice as possible, for I should be greatly mortified if we had not had a good table today of all days." "Yes, we've made everything you told us, Auntie," said Bessie cheerfully, as she rounded off her last spoonful of jelly. "And we've had splendid luck with everything, not a failure in the lot. Look at these pretty tarts. Will we get dinner ready now?" "It's a little early for that," said Aunt Clem, "and since you've got on so well, there's something I want you to make still. I forgot to tell you this morning, but on thinking of my old schoolmate, I have since remembered that, when we were girls together, she was extravagantly fond of gingerbreads. As soon as Aunt Clem disappeared, Alma emerged cautiously from the pantry. "What were you up to in there?" demanded Bessie suspiciously. "I expected nothing else but that Aunt Clem would march in to inspect our cookery, and I was in mortal terror that you were doing something that'd make her cross, and that we'd be too mean, for she's unusually good-humored this morning." "Well," admitted Alma, "when I went in, I saw that dish we took the jam out of for the Washington pies, and there was a little left. So I began to eat some, and it was so good. I couldn't stop. I was eating all the time she was here, although I firmly convinced that she would come in and catch me at it, and then look out." "Did you hear what she said about the Gingersnaps?" asked Bessie. "It's too mean. You'll have to make them, Al, for I have never had decent luck, and I'll put them on the dinner while you're at it." "I was relieved to find it was only Gingersnaps," said Alma, getting briskly to work. "I was certain it would be a pound cake or something that would take ages to make. Aunt Clem's quite capable of it, but these won't take long. I'll just make the big square pan full, and that will be plenty." Bessie was peeling potatoes, and Alma was putting a big pan of full, shiny, golden brown circles in the oven when a sharp little knock came at the front door. "That's Mrs. Simmons. I know her knock as well as anything," said Alma. "What in the world can she want here at this time of day? You go, Bess, for I'm all over flour." Bess went out to the long, dim, old-fashioned hall to the front door. It stood open, held back by a big pink conch, with hints of sea sunsets in its smooth inner convolutions. On the steps stood a chubby little woman with a cup of brown sugar in her hand. Although it was a warm day, she had pinned across her shoulders a gray and white checked shawl, and she wore a man's straw hat. "Good morning, dearie," she said, as Bessie came to the door. "I suppose you're busy as a bee just now, and won't thank an old woman like me for bothering you. And I'll not keep you a minute, not a minute, says I to myself this morning. Now I'll just run over to Clementine's, wish that cup o' brown sugar I borrowed a spell back. And just as I was putting on my things, Fanny Robinson runs in and said she hadn't time to come up herself, but would I take you a note for her. So here it is, dearie, and I ought to excuse the old woman for bothering you." She handed it to Bessie with a significant smile. The girl crimsoned as she took it. She and Fanny Robinson's brother had been going together for so long now that the neighbors viewed it as a settled affair. Although no one was certain, for Bessie was impervious to hints, and no one dared approach Aunt Clem on the subject, not even Mrs. Simmons. Just as Bessie unfolded her note, the kitchen door opened and Alma came in to preserve her sister from falling helplessly into Mrs. Simon's clutches. "Ah, my dearie," said the latter, "is that you, and looking so fresh and cool in all this heat? I'm dead beat out. It's a long walk from our place up here." Alma contrived, unseen by the good lady, to give Bessie a nudge at this palpable hint, but she did not ask Mrs. Simmons in, for a wholesome experience had taught her what lengths such calls were apt to extend. Still, as she was hot and rather tired, she did not object to stand a minute in the cool shadows while her gingersnaps were baking. The front yard was the delight of Aunt Clem's heart, and indeed it was, in a way, a perfect nook of chaotic sweetness. It was very small, being only the length of the house itself, which stood close to the road. It was close in by white paling, nearly hidden from sight in a rank growth of sweet clover, white with its delicate feathery sprays. On each side of the little gate grew an acacia, their graceful branches meeting over in an arc of green. Along the garden path grew rose bushes, pink with exquisite old-fashioned English blush roses that showered their dainty petals on the moist, hard-trodden brown earth beneath. On each side of the brown stone steps grew beds of mint and southern wood and ribbon grass, and along the house under the room windows rows of frilled hollyhocks were brave in their fluted red and white glory. Every old-fashioned flower of Aunt Clem's youth bloomed there in bewildering sweetness. Scarlet poppies flaunted boldly beside dainty white clusters of bride's bouquet. Gorgeous tiger lilies bloomed, swung their jeweled heads over daylilies that lifted their white censers of perfume, like pure priestesses in a carnival of riotous splendor. The rich, dark purple of Adam and Eve almost drowned out the paler tints of the dim, holy Canterbury bells. Bouncing Bess gloried in her ruffled purplish pink skirts beside the lemon and orange of butter and eggs. Scarlet lightning shot its fiery lances over demure white musk. Clove pinks coquetted with sweet williams, and over the front door crept hollysuckle feathery with bloom that sent whiffs of bewitching perfume through the cool hall. "I hear you are going to have company today," insinuated Mrs. Simmons. "Awful tony folks from town. I suppose you're tired out getting ready for them. I said to Josiah, says I, what in the world's going to happen if Clementy has company? It seems so surprising. Are they Clementy's relatives?" "Aunt Clem expects 2 of her sisters," said Alma composedly, "and a Mrs. Dr. Roscoe, a lady Aunt Clem used to go to school with when as a girl, I believe. She hasn't seen her for years, and they used to be great friends." Mrs. Simmons looked lingeringly past Alma at the parlor door. She would like very much to have gone in and seen if the plush set was uncovered, and hear if Aunt Clem deemed the occasion worthy of her rarely displayed old silver and egg-cell china, together with several minor details. With Bessie alone, she could have invented some excuse for going in, but she stood considerably in awe of Alma, so with a rather disappointed farewell, she took her departure. "What made you tell who Aunt Clem was expecting?" reproached Bessie. "That's just what that old thing came here for, to pry and peer around, and now she'll tell everybody far and wide." "Well, she'd have made up a lot and told if I hadn't," said Alma, "so it's just as well she knows the truth. I knew she wouldn't go until she found out something anyway. What's in your note, Bessie?" "It's from Fanny, and she wants us to go over to tea at their place tomorrow afternoon. And you know that young Rogers, who is a friend of George's, is there for his holidays. I've heard so much about him. I'm dying to meet him. Do you think Aunt Clem will let us go?" "I tell you," said Alma diplomatically, dimpling with delight over the possible pleasure, "she's in good humor today, and if everything goes well and the tea is all right, she'll let us do pretty near anything at all. And we'll ask her after there. Oh, my goodness, what do I smell? Oh, Bessie!" She rushed frantically to the kitchen. It was filled with pungent smoke. Alma whipped open the oven door and then dropped into a disconsolate heap on the floor beside it. "Oh, Bessie, they're utterly ruined. What will Aunt Clem say? No Gingersnaps for tea and so much wasted, she'll say. Well, we may as well give up all idea of going to Fanny's. Oh, I wish Mrs. Dr. Roscoe had never been heard of." Bessie had retained sufficient presence of mind to close the door and prevent the telltale odor from permeating the house. Now she set the pan on the table and looked ruefully at the blackened gingersnaps. "Oh, Alma, isn't it mean? What will we do?" Alma was not of a nature to yield tamely to despair. She picked herself up. "Bessie, I don't know. They're crisp enough now, if we could only keep Aunt Clem from finding out. But she'd know there was no gingersnaps, and that would be just as bad. No, I'll mix up another panful right now and have them all ready before she ever knows. Can't we hide them?" "That's it," said Bessie delightedly. "But where put them in the pig barrel? That would never do. Aunt Clem would be sure to see them there, and even she forgave us for spoiling them, she never would be for hiding it on her. Let's put them in those burdocks behind the back of the house." "My goodness, no," counter-argued Bessie. "Aunt Clem was hunting for hen's eggs there last night, and she's liable to go any time again. Let's dump them over next to the yard." "Bessie, you're crazy. Some of the folks would see them, and we'd never hear the last of it. Say, Let's take them down to the brook and hide them in some old stump there. No one will ever find them. It's a crazy thing to do, but I can't think of any other plan. I'm all in a whirl. Come on, said Bessie resolutely. We've got to be quick. There are 4 or 5 real good ones in this end of the pan, not burnt yet. But will we save them? No, bring all the unlucky things along, answered Alma, unconsciously voicing the decree of fate. Here, put them in my apron. Now come. They slipped guiltily out of the house, climbed the fence, and ran the sloping pasture field back of the house like hunted things. At the foot of the hill, in a strip of woodland, ran a brook. The girls reached it breathless. Here's just what we want, said Bessie, stopping before a decayed stump. It's all hollow inside. Pile them in, Al, so there. Now pile some brush over the top. I guess those Gingersnaps will never trouble anybody again. That's on George's land, said Alma as they went back. If he should ever find them, but he couldn't, of course. It's only my guilty conscience. I must hurry with a fresh baking, for if there's any delay, Aunt Clem will suspect. She's so dreadfully suspicious, and I don't want to tell any fibs. But I should never dare to own up to her that I'd spoiled so many Gingersnaps and then gone and hid them in a stump. Alma mixed up the new supply while Bessie set the table, nor would she budge from the oven until they were done to a brown nicely. Then she put them away in a tin box in the pantry and ate her dinner. The afternoon was all respects a pleasant one. The expected guests came and were entertained by Aunt Clem in the rose-scented parlor. The tea was a decided success. The table was faultless in all its appointments, with delicate old china, polished silver, and 2 slender crystal goblets filled with honeysuckle. The afternoon, in all respects, a pleasant one. The expected guests came and were entertained by Aunt Clem in the rose-scented parlor. The tea was a decided success. The table was faultless in all its appointments. The delicate old china, polished silver, and 2 slender crystal goblets filled with honeysuckle. The cold tongue, the flaky biscuits, the quivering jelly, the tarts, the pound cake, all were pronounced perfection. And when finally Mrs. Dr. Roscoe helped herself to her 3rd gingersnap, she said, "Oh, Tina." She called Aunt Clem Tina, much to the surprise of Alma and Bessie, who had never imagined their aunt addressed so familiarly. I see you haven't forgotten my old partiality, and really those are simply delicious. Did you make them, Tina? And when Aunt Clem said with a smile for Alma, "Well, no, it was my niece. She is quite a cook, and I'm so glad you like them," both girls felt assured that their morrow's pleasure was secure. The visitors departed in the early twilight, and when Aunt Clem came up the garden walk, the girls were standing at the door. "Well, my dears, you really did very well today. I must say I was very much pleased, particularly about the Gingersnaps." Here Bessie nudged Alma to intimate that this was the golden opportunity for preferring her request. So Alma picked up her heart of grace and was rewarded by kind and cordial permission, that remembering the deceit practice regarding the Gingersnaps, her conscience smote her severely. Nevertheless, it did not spoil her next day's pleasure. Both girls enjoyed themselves to the utmost. The afternoon was fine, and much wondered about Mr. Rogers proved charming. The girls had expected him to be somewhat disdainful and condescending, as the young men from town were apt to be, and were a little surprised to find him so nice. He was polite to Bessie, but refrained from encroaching on George's preempted territory. To the slightly veiled amusement of the onlookers, he seemed particularly interested in Alma, and contrived to monopolize her almost entirely. She was certainly very pretty in her white gown and a spray of yellow honeysuckle in her dark hair. Her face was a sweet, womanly one, and her wonderful smiles were a positive revelation. The conversation was enjoyably smooth until they went to tea. A plate of gingersnaps was on the table, and Alma nudged Bessie as they sat down to remind her of their secret. Bessie returned the nudge to intimate that she understood it. That line is strange. Bessie returned the nudge to intimate that she understood it. Then, with a thrill of horror, Alma became conscious that George was speaking. What was he saying? Gingersnaps? That reminds me, Mother. I forgot to tell you. I'll bet your gingersnaps aren't as good as some Fred and I found in an old stump down by the brook yesterday. Why, George, said his mother, gingersnaps? That's a stump. What joke are you two silly boys up to now? Meanwhile, Alma had turned pale and convulsively caught Bessie's hand under the table. Both girls felt a chill premonition of coming disaster. Those fatal gingersnaps. Even Aunt Clem's wrath would have been preferable to this. Quite calmly, George went on. No joke at all. It's the sober truth. And the queerest thing, Fred and I were trouting up in the woods yesterday and came home by the brook. We forgot that spring just below the sheep pasture on the other farm was just about dinner time and stopped to have a drink. Fred was sitting up against an old rotten stump, and just as he said he was fearfully hungry and wished he had something to eat, he leaned back, and upon my word, if that stump didn't collapse, and out tumbled a whole lot of gingersnaps. You needn't laugh, it's perfectly true. But George, who would go and put gingersnaps in a stump down there? That's just the mystery. Neither of us could explain it. But they were nearly all burnt black, except about 5. We found that were just right. They were the best gingersnaps I ever tasted in my life. But I only got one. Fred gobbled down the other 4, and he declared if he could find the girl who made them, we agreed it must be a girl, he'd marry her. Just at this point, an awful thing occurred. Bessie laughed. Not a spontaneous ripple that might have passed for a disinterested amusement, but a horrible, self-conscious little giggle that tried to smuggle out of sight as if ashamed of its very existence. Alma shot a furious glance at her, and poor Bessie crimsoned and stared persistently at her plate. In their confusion, neither noticed a glance of swift intelligence exchanged between George and Fred Rogers. The former kept on with his story. We guessed everything on earth to account for their being there, and had to give up. Anyone might burn gingersnaps, but why would they go and hide them away down there? Well, I declare, said Mrs. Robinson, looking around the table with a gentle questioning smile, as if to ask whether anyone could explain the mystery. But Alma and Bessie appeared suddenly smitten to silence. Neither said a word, and before the pause could go awkward, Fred Rogers came to the rescue and turned the talk into other channels. But for the girls, the skeleton was at the feast had been unveiled. Their unalloyed pleasure in the day was gone. Alma felt the worst of the two, since she was the most involved. She felt sure George would never rest until he found out the truth. Perhaps he suspected it now, and then Mr. Rogers would know. Why this should disturb her so much she did not ask herself. Nevertheless, the comical element impressed both girls. At intervals during the evening, they would look at each other with a secret understanding of fun. They longed to get alone, if only for a minute, and have a laugh. But this did not happen until they went upstairs to put on their hats in the twilight. Then Fanny, recollecting something she wanted to show them, went out to get it. Bessie was putting on her gloves by the bed, and Alma was pinning her hat before the glass, but they started across the room. They met halfway and clutched each other by arms and shoulders, not daring to laugh aloud, but they quivered with silent mirth and relived this extra pressure by shaking each other with repressed energy. They whispered, "Oh, Al, did you ever? Bessie, if you ever tell George." "Al, I never will, but isn't it too comical?" Fanny was coming in, so they both slipped demurely into their places, feeling immensely relieved after their little outburst. The four started off in the dewy twilight, but presently George and Bessie lagged behind, while Alma and Fred walked on ahead through the green lanes. It was a cool, dim night. A few luminous stars blinked in and out of the sky. A full moon was rising redly in a hill gap. The girl held her white skirts daintily up out of the damp road and walked directly along, the honeysuckle enwrapping her with a faint moving atmosphere of sweetness. Once or twice from far behind came a sound of hearty laughter which made Alma glance over her shoulder uneasily. What was George laughing at? Surely Bessie would never be telling him. She rather mistrusted her sister under George's persuasive tongue. Alma and Fred waited at the gate until George and Bessie came up, and the two young men went off down the road. Alma pounced like vindictive fate on Bessie before the latter was fairly within the gate. "Bessie, you mean thing, did you dare and tell George about those Gingersnaps affair I told you not to?" "Oh, Al, don't be cross. I couldn't help it. Sit down here on the steps and I'll tell you all about it." "Bessie, you're the biggest goose I ever saw." But Al, he guessed about it all along. He really did. He said he knew it something to do with it whenever I laughed at tea time, and he wouldn't give me any peace until I told him. He threatened to tell it everywhere he went if I didn't. And if I would, he promised never to breathe a word. "He'll tell Fred Rogers," said Alma, "and that's the worst yet." "I don't see why you'd mind him," said innocent Bessie. "He's only a stranger, but George knows us, and he'll cast this up to us as long as we live." "The way of transgressors is hard," quoted the repentant Alma. "It's all right for you. You didn't make the things or suggest hiding them either." "Oh dear, it's an awful muddle all through, but oh, Bessie." And then the two foolish creatures put their faces in each other's shoulders and laughed until they lost their breath. They sat there a little while longer, at first whispering their girlish confidences and then in silence. The air was dizzily sweet with the odors of dew-kissed flowers and trampled mint. The acacia leaves wavered to and fro. Bessie absently picked a heart out of a damp rose, while Alma leaned her chin on her hands and looked at the white stars that sparkled and scintillated in the infinite space above them. When the moon rose above the treetops and shot her silver lances through the acacia boughs, both girls got up with a long breath. "If Aunt Clem knew we'd been sitting here in the dew," whispered Bessie, as they slipped in out of the white radiance. Alma answered an unspoken consequence with her soft laugh. As soon as Fred and George were out of the girls' hearings, the latter stopped and began to laugh. He laughed so long and so heartily that Fred was compelled to join in with his own sheer sympathy. "Such a lark," gasped George, struggling to recover his breath. "Fred, I found out about the Gingersnaps. Those sly pusses back there. I knew they must be at the bottom of it, but it was Alma made them, it appeared." Whereupon they, undeterred by any vision of Bessie's reproachful eyes, he told it all to Fred, and then they both laughed again and again, with fresher appreciation of the turn of every time. After that, a silence fell between them. Both were thinking, with a sort of chivalrous tenderness, of the girls they had just left. When they reached home, George said jokingly as he opened the gate, "Are you going to do as you said, Fred? Marry the girl who made the Gingersnaps?" "There's no knowing," he said. "Don't you think I might do worse, George?" And Bessie's lover admitted that he might. That was published in July 1895 in the Ladies' Journal, Toronto, under the pen name of Maud Cavendish.